Hi, boys and girls. So this video is a reference for notes of polyhedra. And so this is going to be a little bit of help to guide you in what you need to know in order to identify a net of a polyhedra and identify a three-dimensional shape that can turn into a net. Okay, so when you see the word polyhedra, you'll notice that poly means more than one. And so when we're talking about polyhedra, we're talking about three-dimensional shapes or shapes that have more than one side to build a three-dimensional shape. Okay, and so when we talk about a net, it's taking that three-dimensional shape and turning it into a two-dimensional layout of that three-dimensional shape. So I'm going to talk about what you need to know in order to take a net and turn it into that three-dimensional solid, or take a three-dimensional solid and turn it into the net. So I'm going to do three different examples. I'm going to do a pyramid example, I'm going to do a prism example, and I'm going to do a cylinder example. And the most important thing to know when you're identifying a polyhedra is to pay attention to the shape of the base. Okay, if the base is a triangle, that's going to be the basis of how you define the prism or the pyramid. If it's a square, or if it's an octagon, or if it's a circle, that's going to be information that's really relevant to identifying the entire prism or pyramid. Okay, so let's start with a pyramid. Okay, if I have a pyramid that has a base of a square, okay, I'm going to identify this polyhedra as a square pyramid. Okay, and I'm going to know it's a square pyramid because the base is a square and there's only one of them. Okay, so if this were to turn into a net, it would look something like this, where you have a square that is surrounded on all sides by triangles. Now, keep in mind, boys and girls, not the greatest artist here, but if you were to take this pyramid and cut it open on its edges, you'd be able to lay it flat and get a net that looks similar to this. Okay, and you know that these are going to match because you have a square base here and you have a square base here. And I know that it's a pyramid because there's only one base. Okay, so going from this direction to this direction, or this direction to this direction, we're going to always know that it's a pyramid because it only has one base. Okay, now it changes a little bit when we go from a pyramid to a prism. Okay, and the only difference between a pyramid and a prism is that a prism has two bases. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example. If I have a triangular prism, okay, so if I have a triangular prism that's going to line up and look something like this, okay, I'm going to know that it's a triangular prism because, number one, the bases are triangles, okay, and I know it's a prism because there are two of them, okay. So if I were to lay this three-dimensional solid out into a net, it's going to look something like this, okay, where I have a rectangle next to a rectangle next to a rectangle, and on both sides I'm going to have a triangle. Now, there's other ways that you can lay out a net related to a triangular prism, but for the most part, you got to have two triangles and three rectangles. Okay. Remember, boys and girls, we know that it's a prism because it has two bases. Okay. Difference between a pyramid and a prism are the number of bases that they have. Now, no matter what, you have to pay attention to what kind of base it is, because that type of base is going to define what pyramid or prism it is. Okay. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is a cylinder. You may or may not have examples of this in your work that you have to complete this week, but I'm going to know that it's a cylinder if the bases are circles. Okay. So if I have an object that looks something like this, I'm going to know it's a cylinder because its bases are circles. Okay. Now, when I lay this type of solid out into a net, it is going to have a circle attached to a rectangle attached to another circle. Okay. Because this part of my cylinder right here is actually a rectangle if I lay it flat. Okay, so that should give you enough help to know how to identify nets of polyhedra. Remember, your goal is to decide, when I have the solid, what does it look like as a net? And when I have a net that's laid out two-dimensionally, if I were to fold it back up like a transformer back into the solid, what would that look like? Okay, that's all the help that you get for this video, and we will see you for the next ones in a little bit. Have a great night.